Hello loves, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about generational trauma and understanding generational trauma within your family bloodline. Okay, generational trauma is trauma that has been passed down through the generations as the word says, but it's important to understand. In order to properly understand generational trauma, you need to understand that every single ancestor that you have has contributed something different to the family bloodline. Okay, some positive, some negative, and some neutral. You have neutral ancestors who have had very neutral lives, who didn't, necessarily sway to positive or negative or contributed anything bad. And so it's important to keep that in mind. Not all of your ancestors are going to be all bad, and not all of your ancestors are going to be all good. Some are going to be in between the two. So keep that in mind as well. But when it comes to generational trauma, trauma gets activated by different people within the bloodline. Some of this can be dictated and can be highlighted within your astrology chart if you're looking at the different natal charts of, members of your family. You can see certain things being activated in certain ways. But for example, if you have a family member who, living family member who happens to be an artist and happens to love, music or loves cooking or whatnot, and there were many ancestors within the bloodline that you have that actually, that was their thing. That's what they did. And that's what they love doing, and that's how they express themselves, etc., etc. You have those ancestors working with that person today, but they're also activating that passion from the blood itself, because blood has a lot of data and information and messages. We are carrying the blood of every ancestor that we have had before. So it's important to remember that there are certain people within the family that will activate certain things from the family bloodline. So if you have a whole entire pool of ancestors that were like experts in X, Y, Z, and B, or they were really good at hunting and they were really good at something else, you might have some members of the family who activate certain skill sets, and that goes hand in hand with the negative traits as well. It's important to understand that when it comes to generational trauma, there are some family members, and you can see this again if you look at their natal chart. There's some family members you can see some of their shadow astrology will be looking a little sus, but there's some members of the family will activate some of the negative qualities of the blood itself. And by the way, for those who wanted to know, this is a little bit of blood magic. It's just something that is not talked about often within the spiritual community, but this is technically considered blood magic. It's just that you're a walking embodiment of it, right? And so there's going to be some ancestors who had done some not so great things in their lives, and so it's important to understand that there are certain ancestors. Let's say you had a murderer as an ancestor, or emotionally abusive ancestor, or a manipulative ancestor, or someone who did some really bad stuff, right? Or added any type of trauma like pain, hurt, something that just keeps happening. So let's say you had an ancestor that was really, really bad with money. They just gambled a lot, or they didn't know how to retain it. They weren't responsible enough, whatever the issue was, right? There are going to be some of the family members who will activate and tap into that energy as well. So it's important to understand and recognize and sit with yourself and say, wait, what have I gained? What skill sets have I gained from my ancestors? Really kind of having that discernment and trying to understand what it is that you personally are tapping into, but also recognizing, looking at your family collectively and saying, oh, well, my mom used to tell me stories about this person. I think they're kind of very similar to that person. And you can kind of, as you hear stories of your family, you can kind of put two and two together from members of your family and different things that they have activated before. I have members of my family that, personally speaking, are business people. They're very, very business savvy. They're very creative, I have fashion designers in my bloodline a lot of the time, from my great grandma to my aunt, who activated that skill set because she used to design. So my great grandma would design clothes for specifically for men at her time. That was the story that my family told me. And my aunt actually became a fashion designer in the Dominican Republic. So it's one of those things where it's just like you can see how some skill sets recycle through the bloodline, and it's almost like the passion for the thing gets activated. And so that's the same way that generational trauma happens. So when it comes to like some of the men of the family, there might be different trauma with the women of the family. You might see different issues there. You might see different issues with the way that they express their emotion, with the way they relate to each other, with the way they relate to you. I had some ancestors, specifically within the male side, specifically my dad's side of the family, that can be very, very, very hard-headed. Now, people just say, oh my God, all men are hard-headed. But where does that come from? Because that technically is a generational trauma, because somewhere down the bloodline, someone did not want to listen. Someone didn't want to take advice. Someone did not want to, you know? And so where did that come from? It's important to kind of dissect things and look at where these things come from so you can better understand the energy as a whole and why these things manifest the way that they do. Because a lot of this gets highlighted again within the natal chart. You can kind of see a couple of glimpses of how people, especially when you're looking at Saturn's energy, when you're looking at Neptune's energy, the generational planets, when you're looking at their energy. If you have like fourth house energy placements and stuff like that, you're going to be tapping into some of the generational, and even the sign that falls in your fourth house and your eighth house as well. You'll be able to tap into the energy of the past, how you relate to the past, how you relate to the knowledge of the past, the energy of the past, the blood of the past. And so it's important to kind of look at, you know, what you have done with your inheritance, specifically with the blood that you have gained, the family that you have gained, the collective experience that you have gained, and kind of dissect that. Now, some people will only be able to do this spiritually, because of a lack of connection with their bloodline family members. And there are traumas that you can gain from your legal ancestors as well, because that is also a thing. When you, like, let's say, for example, I'm marrying Babe next year, right? I am going to be gaining her ancestors, her community ancestors, because we will be legally married. When you do anything legally, that is a ceremony, okay? And so that means that I am legally now connected to her. She is my family. So that means that I gain her ancestors. So it's important to understand the legalities of the thing. There's going to be times where you legally gain ancestors. So for example, my child that I have will have not only my ancestors, but also will have Babe's ancestors, because legally we are together, right? And so it's important to understand the legal aspects as well. And we're going to dive into legalities and ancestor work, because there are a lot that can be said about it in another video. So stay tuned for that. But it's important to understand generational trauma, how it gets passed down, how it gets activated. And that there's just going to be some ancestors that are very neutral, that just come in, do what they do, have very neutral lives or experiences, that are like very, you know, almost seems like a movie in many ways, or just seems like a storybook kind of way, where it's just like they live their lives, they did this, they got married, like it just seems like that. And it happens, it is. But not every single ancestor is going to be toxic. Not every single ancestor is going to be positive. And some ancestors are just very chill, okay? So definitely keep that in mind. Don't look at your ancestors as collectively all traumatized, because that's not what they are. Generational trauma is just trauma that has been passed down by specific ancestors. This is why when I personally go in to do healing work with the ancestors, I specifically ask, to whom, to where, to why, to when, whom did this trauma begin with? Which ancestor was it? Come forth so we can talk it out, so we can heal the situation. I specifically target it that way, so that way I can actually heal from the thing. So that way I can actually, you know, address the thing correctly. And so it's important to nip it in the butt with the first ancestor that the thing started with, versus trying to do it backwards. When you do it from the beginning, when you specifically heal the first ancestor that a trauma started with. So for example, if there was like emotional issues, or you have an ancestor that has a hard time expressing themselves, or doesn't feel open expressing themselves, or like any type of assaults or something violent or something like that within the family, when you start it with when you go straight to the source, okay, go straight to that source ancestor, the first one, it stops it from repeating itself later on. And that's what's important. You don't want that element to be active in the blood anymore, which is why healing generational trauma heals the family bloodline. You see what I did there? Yes. So keep that in mind when you're doing this work. We're going to dive into more work for ancestor work. I am currently writing a book about it because Spirit just told me to just write the thing. So I'm writing the book for y'all, so stay tuned for that. I'll let you guys know when it's done. But definitely make sure that you keep that in mind when it comes to ancestor work, so that way your perception of them is not all exactly the same. Okay, I will see y'all in the next video. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I will see y'all in the next video. Don't forget to subscribe. Definitely check out the Patreon down below, or you can become a channel member. The button will be right next to the subscribe button. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe. I will see y'all in the next video. I love you guys.